All right, the Bothell City Council is back from break, and we are moving into AB 16-130. Let the record reflect that Councilmember Spivey is attending via speakerphone for this agenda item 16-130, relating to the continued public hearing regarding potential planning code amendments to the Fitzgerald 35th Southeast and Canyon Creek 39th Southeast subarea plans and BMC chapters 12.50 and 12.52. Councilmember Spivey, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, great. Let the record reflect that Councilmember Spivey, who is attending via speakerphone, can be heard by all present in the chambers. Can everybody hear Councilmember Spivey? Great. All right. Yeah, so we will open the public hearing, and we'll start off with Mr. Burdett, the Community Development Director.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. Tonight, with the Fitzgerald study that we've been working on over the past 4 months, I thought I'd give you a little introduction and quick overview and what we're planning to do tonight before I turn it over to Bruce Blackburn for PowerPoint presentation. We've had good input. We had 3 facilitated workshops with stakeholders that included property owners, environmental groups, and interested parties. Reviewed best available science, low impact development with parametrics. We've outlined different pathways for addressing demonstrative and prescriptive approaches. There's been good cross communication and clarification of information along the way. Stakeholders have been exchanging ideas, and at the last council meeting, consultants presented a comparison of LID manual for 2016 with regulations and the existing NIC-FUCHAPA overlay. I think that's given staff a good basis of information and public input. And with those workshops that we held, we had participation of about 30 to 35 participants at each meeting. So we're ready to move into code drafting phase. And as we move into this area, we're hoping that the council can give us direction. We appreciate all the council's questions that have come forward and the information flowing back and forth between stakeholders and council members and staff, I think, has been very healthy to this process. Zoning, of course, is a tool that is used to control the use of land and buildings thereupon for the health, safety, and welfare of the community. It's a tool that can work in concert with environmental regulations, and it probably works best when environmental regulations are in a separate section of the code into themselves rather than embedded within zoning, but working in concert with zoning. So in looking forward, please give us your thoughts and direction. Bruce Blackburn is going to cover the information that we have tonight. One item that I would like to mention is that when we look at clustering, I know that's a hot topic, that we would recommend, if you decide to work on a clustering ordinance or part of draft regulations, that you consider doing clustering for wetland buffers or critical area buffers, but not for the critical areas themselves. You could do some on-site density transfer for those buffers, and that's sort of relational. The bigger the buffer, the larger the on-site density transfer. That's kind of consistent with matching zoning with environmental controls. So we can work on that if that's an important aspect of this. And a PUD would be a good tool to implement that with. A green PUD like Bothell already has with some amendments would work well for that. we would probably stop at that and not look at on-site density transfers for the critical areas of the wetlands themselves, just because those areas have already been enacted with regulations. They have overlays for floodplains and other areas that have really already been accounted for in real estate economics. But for the buffers, I think it's probably a good idea to have some sort of density transfer. And it's consistent with a lot of directions that many cities are going these days. So I'll turn the time over to Bruce and Ben Burke with Parametrics. They have the PowerPoint slides. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I want to just put up this slide. This kind of shows us where we are in the process. Essentially, what we're looking at here is that this is, of course, the primary actions in the boxes. Of course, public input occurs at all points, but I also wanted to point out that the best available science and best management practices review and gap analysis is an ongoing item, and it is something that will be occurring throughout this entire process. I just want to make sure everybody understands that. So if somebody says, well, the best available science hasn't been completed on this aspect or this aspect, there is still a lot of best available science to be done in this process. At the June 28th public hearing, the council kind of directed staff to identify 3 options, and those 3 options were one, status quo. In other words, the current LID overlay provisions within the North Creek Fish and Wildlife Critical Habitat Protection Area, or NCFWCHAPA, would remain fully in effect. Another option was to look at hybrid regulations, where you'd have a set of regulations that both protect the environment and allow appropriate amounts of development. And a third option would be to repeal and replace the North Creek Fish and Wildlife Critical Habitat Area Protection Area LID overlay in its entirety and replace those protections with enhanced critical area regulations and a new 2016 LID manual. Now, the status quo was an item that the council was not really particularly interested in, primarily because it still had the same issues. However, we need to point out that the do-nothing alternative is always a default until the council affirmatively eliminates that as an option through the approval of new or revised regulations. The hybrid regulations would basically do both protect the environment and allow appropriate amounts of development. And at the June 28th hearing, the council seemed interested in looking at this approach a little bit further. And essentially what this would do is this would undertake substantial amendments to the current LID overlay plan and code language that would clarify and remove ambiguity from the regulations, which is an item we've heard of quite a bit about. But there's also some other options that are included within the staff report. One of those options would be to remove the Zone 1 or the hillside areas that are located east of 39th Avenue from any special overlay provisions by applying the citywide critical area regulations and the new 2016 LID manual. Another one would be to assign different zoning classifications to the land located east of the 39th Avenue, which could be any type of a zoning classification, R5400D or detached, R7200, R9600 we've heard as well, and those would be applied to that hillside area. The other areas within Zone 1 would still have the same zoning classifications, R9600 LID and R40000 LID, and those are basically between North Creek and 39th Avenue Southeast. Finally, and one of the things we didn't actually put into the staff report, but the council has identified discussion previously, was this opt-out exemption thing for something like a very large lot subdivision or on existing lots of record, where people could have a simplified process to go through with this. And again, as I kind of briefly identified, all of these approaches that we're talking about tonight are going to have to be subject to a gap analysis that will be prepared by Parametrics. And we may not have the final answer tonight, but we will have to have that gap analysis, which will report back to the council in the future public hearings. Now, one of the things I just want to show is that one of the options was changing some of the zoning designations, and this is just a map that just kind of shows where that potentially could be. The yellow line would be a new zoning line boundary, and this is the area to the hillside or is part of the Zone 1. The remainder of Zone 1, which is west of 39th Avenue, you may want to change that to a different zoning classification, but this area would conceivably be removed from the LID overlay provisions and NICFA chopper regulations. There may be some tweaks here and there with the critical area regulations we may want to look into, but that's basically the concept that's shown in a map provision. Finally, the third option is to repeal and replace the NICFA chopper LID overlay in its entirety and replace that with enhanced critical area regulations and, of course, the new 2016 LID manual. Now, this action could include consideration like enhanced buffers from wetlands or streams or fish and wildlife habitat areas within the sub-area, and it'd be enforced through the existing provisions underneath the city's critical area regulations, which is underneath Chapter 1404 of the Bothell Municipal Code. This also would require those existing intact forest areas to be protected as critical areas, and again, they'd be subject to the mitigation sequencing provisions of the avoidance, minimization, and mitigation of the critical area regulations. And again, as we've identified, we're going to have to do a little bit more additional analysis to identify whether implementation of the new 2016 LID manual is sufficient in and of itself to protect the groundwater resources. I think you heard some comments earlier today about some concerns about the groundwater resources. We're still pulling up information on that. It is a very difficult portion of this regulation that we're going to have to get correct, and we want to get correct. But I think I'd mention a couple things that were in the original 2006 parametric study, which basically is that only about 6% of the groundwater contribution to North Creek is from the LID overlay area. And in other words, the use of, and it's very possible with the use of forest equivalent LID facilities, and those are the things like the bioinfiltration swales, the rain gardens and things like that that mimic forest conditions. They may provide adequate groundwater protections without the need for any additional measures. That is something we are still working to work on, and again, that's part of the gap analysis. Considering the lateness of the hour, I think what we'll do is we'll turn it over to questions to the council for the staff and the consultant, as well as, of course, get some public testimony going as well. So I think I'll conclude with that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we go straight into council questions of consultants and staff. And then we'll hear public testimony. So is there any questions for staff? Councilmember Sandberg?
Yes, thank you. So in the agenda bill, and then as I'm hearing you speak, and I've read some of the testimony, I'm a little confused about what these guiding manual documents are. I've heard them described as the 2016 DOE manual, the 2016 DOE surface water manual, a 2016 LID manual, a 2016 LID surface water manual. I'm confused because how many manuals are we talking about? And it seems like there's the LID track that Planning Commission is on right now to satisfy NPDES requirements, which is separate from this Department of Ecology manual. I'm not clear.
Okay.
And I asked this question because one of the options that we're considering is to let the manual guide development. And I don't know exactly what the manual is.
Right, and I'm sorry, we kind of went through that pretty quickly. So here's the situation. Underneath the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System Permit Phase 2, which the city of Bothell is subject to, we have to adopt a surface water control manual that is equivalent to that which the Department of Ecology put out in 2014. That's been updated to 2014. That's the LID, the new LID manual, the surface water manual. All basically means the same thing. We are going to have a brand new set of regulations as how the city approaches control of surface water runoff.
So when we're using we're all using those terms all interchangeably for one manual,
Yes.
which is the 2014 Ecology Surface Water Manual that we can add additional LID measures into
Yes.
that are city specific.
Yes. Yes. And what's happening before the Planning Commission right now, in fact, we have a hearing tomorrow night, is that through the other locations within the Bothell Municipal Code, zoning, design construction standards, there may be impediments to implementing that manual and those provisions. That's basically what the Planning Commission is looking at right now, is removing those type of impediments. There may be something within the zoning code that may be a problem with that type of an approach. So that's the action that's happening with the Planning Commission now. What will happen later on this year is the Public Works Department will work on crafting the new LID Surface Water Manual, the 2016, 2014 manual. So, and that's one of the problems. We've got so many different names we had here. But I think about it as the new 2016 manual is basically what we're talking about.
The new 2016 Surface Water Manual.
Surface Water Manual.
From
yes.
Department of Ecology.
Yes.
That will incorporate LID techniques.
Yes. Enhanced LID techniques.
Enhanced LID techniques.
Yes.
And does this 2014/2016 Surface Water Manual with enhanced LID techniques, does that have any provisions in there to protect existing forest cover, tree canopy, tree retention?
No. In fact, that's where the marriage between the sub-area regulations and that manual comes into play. You will have some things within the manual that are going to be supplemented by the sub-area regulations, very similar to what they are now.
And does the manual speak specifically to effective impervious area?
In a general way, yes. And here's basically how the manual works. Now, I'm not a surface water engineer, but I'm going to try to use my best I can here. Essentially what there is a model that will be required to be used for every site that is developed in the city. That model will be based upon certain types of inputs that the design engineer will be applying. And those inputs range from the soil conditions to the site slopes to the type of vegetation cover and how they are doing the different low impact development surface water treatments. That model basically will create a mechanism that identifies, okay, if you have this much impervious surface, you have to have this size vault or this size pond or do this much bioinfiltration or this much rain garden. That basically that dual purpose provision identifies where you have to have more or less impervious surface. Remember, the more impervious surface you have, the larger responsibility you have for providing for that mitigation of that flow off your property.
So what you're describing for me for this manual is it's a very technical, engineering-based document. It's not a land use planning document. It's not something where there's a menu of LID approaches and we require a developer to pick from those, or?
Yeah, and actually you're identifying a really key component of this whole approach, and that is the fact that the manual is a very engineering-oriented manual, but it also has some impacts upon land use. And the example of the amount of impervious surface or amount of hardscape, if you would, on your piece of property. Your zoning code may say, okay, well, you can have a certain impervious surface cover. You may not be able to accommodate that with the on-site system as designed. So that's part of the marriage between those two. While the manual does not necessarily affect underlying zoning, it does influence the site design.
And so so the manual affects surface water calculations, but does it affect or impact groundwater resources?
A little bit. And here's where there's this interesting, I don't want to use the term gap because it's overused, but there does seem to be an area where the LID manual is not as strong, if you would, on groundwater. And that's partly because groundwater is not as well understood as some of these other mechanisms. For example, surface water is a very highly understood feature of the landscape, if you would. Groundwater is more difficult from the standpoint of the manual. However, and I think as Paul Fent has identified, there are features within the LID manual, and I was talking about the forest equivalent, basically LID techniques, bioinfiltration, rain gardens, that basically disperse water into the soil that help to reduce the impact upon groundwater.
And then one of the previous speakers made the point that our critical areas ordinance cannot be used to protect shallow groundwater because the aquifer recharge area language in the critical areas ordinance only refers to potable water.
That's correct. And basically, the idea is that you wouldn't be able to use that feature of our curricular area regulations to protect the groundwater. What you do is that would be where, if you had a gap, let's say, between those two documents, you'd have to put it into your sub-area regulations, the Fitzgerald sub-area regulations, very much the way it is done currently.
And if we were to do something for the Fitzgerald sub-area, wouldn't we want to do that for the entire city? I think that's what we keep coming back to, is that we are treating this area special and unique from other parts of the area. And so if groundwater resources and impervious area and forest cover are important, it should be important citywide because we're all in a watershed.
That sounds like a policy question.
So, but
No, yeah.
is that what Planning Commission is looking at in terms of updating or incorporating LID techniques?
No,
into the 2016 manual?
Their focus is fairly narrow in removing any barriers there may be to implementing this provision.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Sandberg, while you have the floor, will you extend our meeting past 9 p.m.?
Oh, gosh.
I move to extend to 10 p.m.
I'll second. Do we need to do the electronic vote?
Thanks.
Okay.
All right, thank you. I'm just kidding.
Councilmember Spivey, are you still on the phone?
I'm still here.
Okay. I guess we can't, do you want us to do it electronically even though can you verbally give us your motion? The motion on the floor is to extend until 10 p.m. Are you,
I can verbally cast my vote.
okay. Did everybody place their vote to extend till 10?
Yes.
Councilmember Spivey has voted yes, so it passes unanimously, and are you done, Councilmember Sandberg, with your questions?
I am, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Spivey, did you want to ask questions now, or would you like to wait till later?
I'm waiting for now. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
I have a few. Regarding the clustering, Director Burdette said if clustering, it's on our docket. Do we know when we'll be discussing that and how that would work with the Fitzgerald area?
Well, as far as the timing of it, we want to get to it as quickly as we possibly can. We've actually been trying to come up with a way we can get it up to you sooner than later, because it's certainly our preference to do something like that. As far as how it would affect the Fitzgerald, ideally, the clustering would be occurring about the same time as we do the final Fitzgerald. Now remember, the Fitzgerald is a plan and code amendment. We can only do plan amendments one time a year. That's going to be basically brought in together with the 3 other plan amendments that we have kind of waiting in the wings right now. So sometime toward the end of the year, you will have that action. We are hopeful and optimistic that we will have something for you to look at for a clustering provision.
Okay. And I assume the tree ordinance piece wouldn't really impact since we already have some sort of forest coverage guiding the Fitzgerald area.
Well, and you're right. The citywide tree preservation provisions are different than the Fitzgerald LID provisions or what they would potentially be proposed to be done.
So a couple questions.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Unless you go with option number 3, which would be to repeal the North Creek Fish, and then we'd have to create something new.
Okay. So I sent a bunch of questions to staff, and I'm trying to figure out where to start. We've read that in the past, the parametric study identified a shallow aquifer. And then I had a question regarding how the test pits jive with the shallow aquifer. And a couple of the staff responses, there were many, left me a little bit even more confused. And so I wanted to ask specifically, it says there is no empirical evidence that the shallow aquifer is indeed shallow, meaning at or directly below the surface uniformly throughout the subarea. In many areas, like within the mapped wetlands within the subarea, the aquifer may occur at the surface, but the shallow aquifer may be several feet beneath the surface in many other places based on observations from geologic test pits performed in the Zone 1 area. At these locations, there were between 8 to 15 feet of soil cover until the operator excavating the test pits observed saturated soils. And again, those test pits, so that was, one time last spring, correct?
I'm not sure exactly when the time was, but it was a one-time test pit analysis, yes.
And so I guess I'm trying to understand when the parametric study identifies the shallow aquifer, and then we say there's no empirical evidence that the shallow aquifer is shallow.
Well, and here's basically how that works out. And essentially what it was is you want to, he's actually got a better response than I probably do. Thanks, Ben.
No problem. And I'm going to caveat this by saying I am also not a hydrogeologist, but I just read the report today again because I anticipate this was going to come up. The existing shallow aquifer is shallow relative to the deep aquifer. So there's an aquifer that underlies the North Creek subbasin as well as other portions that's confined. So it has like a compressed till layer down. And then in this particular, the Woods Creek or Coal Creek subbasin, there's another layer of basically water that sits on top of it that feeds the surface water features, the wetlands and the streams directly. So it is shallow relative to the deep water aquifer that feeds directly into North Creek and provides the bulk of water in North Creek within the Foochaka zone. I can never get that right. And then also, Palm Creek is the other creek that actually is deeper. And so it actually intercepts the deep water aquifer, and it's supported more from that. And Coal Creek is supported almost entirely from the relatively shallow aquifer. But it doesn't necessarily mean in all areas throughout the sub-area, because it's pretty much on a hill, that it's at the same elevation relative to the surface. And so in some places it's at the surface where all those wetlands are mapped, pouring out from the surface. And in other areas it's down pretty deep. And this data, although it's referenced in the parametric study, actually comes from the Brightwater corridor study that was done. That actually has some pretty direct boring data. I think it was right around the 195th corridor, which is right in that area, although not exactly in there.
So we don't have a map, though, of those depths?
We have, it's not a map. There's cross sections, and the way they are, they're not all lined up, exactly in a row. And so, with any sort of information on groundwater, you have sampling locations, and the underlying soils and geology, and they, they basically put together it's not really a rendering, but an opinion of what they are. And actually, if you look at the 2006 study, that rendering is in there, and it's relatively good and still decent information. But most of that came from actually the Brightwater corridor studies, where they did quite a bit of drilling.
Okay, because I am concerned as well about groundwater protection. And then this staff response, the last bullet was LID BMPs, which is best management practices, I assume, in and of themselves may not completely address impacts from groundwater interception if development includes excavations that penetrate into the shallow aquifer. And so obviously that concerns me.
Right. So that is true.
So how do we protect?
Well, that means that the LID does a good job of getting the water that naturally soaked into the ground back into the ground. But it's not going to be at exactly the same location, because you had a forested area or grass or whatever, and it soaked in over the area based on soil conditions and where the rain fell and a bunch of other things. And in an LID environment, it's going in where you're telling it to go within the LID. But it's going to get in there. And as long as it's on a site, you know that the variances are going to be a site-specific issue, so relative to the size of the site, which is generally, not a particularly large area. What they don't do is, if you have groundwater moving in the soil down the hill, and you go ahead and excavate into that, the path of groundwater would be intercepted, like a French drain or footing drains or whatever on foundations, and expressed in other locations. And they don't really address that. That just kind of gets water going into the soil, you could still intercept groundwater that's moving through the soil. And that's particularly hard, particularly with almost no data, like you mentioned, to really know a lot about. And that's why in the existing regulations, there's limitations on the amount of grading and the amount of grade change that can go on a site. And there's a specific regulation that says you cannot excavate and build into the shallow aquifer as observed during the low water periods, which is why they do the test pits. So if they have test pits and they go out and they find, water at a foot, that's going to be very different from their site design. That's why they do it first, versus going down and finding it at 20 feet. It gives them a little more leeway. But you're right, it's limited. The resolution is limited by the number of pits and samples and the time of year and a bunch of factors. But a lot of our land use decisions are based on imperfect data, and that's why we pick regulations. And so that is one of the gaps that we've identified. You have groundwater protection elements in almost all of your sub-area plans. There's a section of them. And so we could go with what we currently have in there, but we know that that's been difficult for folks to implement. We could get rid of them completely and just say, well, we're going to deal with it with LID, or we can kind of come up with something in the middle to balance the two based on the amount of information and data we have, which isn't a lot. And so it would be very like sort of the parking discussion you had earlier today. Do you do it before you have the data, or you hope to get a lot of data, and is it going to make a difference? It's very similar. You're going to have to make a decision at some point on how you handle it based on either going out and doing a lot more study or going with the information that we have, which is admittedly limited and not collected for that particular reason. The big thing is with the groundwater is you're not talking about a $40,000 study. It can be very costly to do a conclusive groundwater study. So it's just one of those things you balance. So maybe you err to a more protective regulation that's not as confusing as the current one, or you can also remove it and monitor things. I mean, there's a whole lot of approaches that you could take and that we could certainly explore as we're going to do this gap analysis and come up with some options if that's the direction that you want us to go.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
And then the other questions, I had two more. Forest coverage. So, there's one part of this packet that says the current forest coverage is 36. I think it needs to be defined, because then the old code got changed from 60 to 50, but existing is 36. So I feel like there's a definition problem.
Well, there are. So within the entire basin, which extends beyond the city, that's where your 36 number comes in. You actually have a study I just saw that was published, I believe, in March, which was a tree canopy study that was done with the King County Conservation District and some GIS modeling that puts canopy coverage in this basin at about 60%. One of the main points, and this is something that Paul would be proud that I remember, is that there's a difference between tree canopy coverage and effective forest as far as low impact development goes. So there's tree coverage, and which is important and has a lot of great benefits, but then there's functioning forest that functions in a hydrologic way in a particular manner, and that is a smaller number because, as you saw in some of the pictures, and a lot of there's trees, but underlying it is either grass or just dirt or one layer of shrubs with no duff layer. And so that's one of the things that everyone equates tree cover with forest, and that's not, from a hydrology standpoint, not exactly true. Although it's certainly better to have trees and grass than no trees and grass.
Right. And then my next one's for staff. So in your page 144, where we show the different options for zoning and what it would look like and what the impervious cover would be. So I asked a question, and I just need a clarification. Are we talking 5400A or D? Because the packet says A, and then the question that you responded to of mine
Yes,
responded with D.
and I really apologize for that. The intent was to look at detached single-family, which would 5400D. And
So,
when
so the zoning scenario is actually
D, yes, not A. That's correct.
okay. I think that's all my questions. I did want to say I appreciate that you added staff notes on council input from the last time, because it helped kind of jog my memory, and it was good to have it written down.
Thank you.
Additional questions? No? You're working on it? I can ask a couple questions. So, do we have a cut and fill limitation citywide?
Not currently.
Wow.
We have some provisions about how tall the retained structure can be. It's primarily an aesthetic thing, as well as, how they do with their engineering, but there is not a maximum cut or fill provision within the general citywide provisions.
Not even in the, okay. Interesting.
Yes.
Is that something that we could consider doing, or as part of this?
Within this sub-area, yes, but not to address the citywide issue. We'd have to have another process for that.
And I don't recall, what is the cut limitation right now?
It's approximately within a certain number of feet within a building pad that's a 5-foot maximum that is in the current Fitzgerald provisions, as well as, of course, as the provision that says you can't intrude into the saturated soil groundwater tabletop, basically.
Oh, so it's probably the latter that's the hindering factor.
It's the latter that's the hindering factor. And again, when we talked about the original discussion about that, there are a lot of issues that come into play there, primarily because we have kind of a relatively sloped area in the hillside end. Of course, our maximum road gradient was 15% is just about there. So by the time you get up there, you're almost already having to do a cut or a fill of greater than 5 feet. So it's really, really limiting from that standpoint.
Just to put the road in?
Just to put the road in, yes.
Oh, okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask, so there wasn't a whole lot of information about the repeal and replace option in our packet, like for example, like compared to the hybrid. Clearly, you guys are pretty interested in the hybrid one, because that's like 3 pages of information, and then about half a page on the repeal and replace. Could you give us a little more clarity? I've read it a couple times now, and I'm still just kind of at a loss about what exactly it's proposing to do.
Well, in repeal and replace, essentially what you would do is you would take the NICFA CHAPA and the LID overlay, and they would be basically repealed, and they would no longer be effective. What our proposal would be to take the existing critical area regulations and amend those regulations by increasing the buffer width from wetlands and streams and things like that, as well as creating some provisions that would say, okay, a forest area is a protected critical area. So essentially what you'd be doing is that you'd be kind of trying to get to a same protection level of a certain amount of area that is basically preserved as a forest or a natural vegetation through another methodology. Finally, of course, we'd be applying, of course, the new LID surface water manual as well. So between those two provisions, what we would do is we would basically be augmenting and trying to come up fairly closely to what we have currently in those provisions as far as the areas that would be preserved and things like that.
And that
Just using a different mechanism.
And that would just be, so most critical area ordinances are citywide.
And ours are too, yes.
And so this would actually change the critical areas ordinance citywide.
Yes. Now, well, not necessarily. Again, now, one of the things to remember is that our critical area regulations already have some very specific provisions for some special buffers. And in fact, the area between 240th and 228th Street has a special buffer of 150 foot from North Creek. And that's in our critical area regulations as well. And basically what you do is you just plug in some various provisions within your critical area regulations that would say, okay, within this location and this type of wetland, the buffer would be something a little bit different.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir. Mr. Spivey, Councilmember Spivey.
Yes, I have to go on a response. I'll be disconnecting now. Thank you.
Okay. So hold on, so Councilmember Spivey is no longer on the phone. I just make sure I was supposed to read the script here. Well, the discussion has not concluded, so. All right, he's no longer available. So, and your name's Darren, correct? So last time you were here, you talked quite a bit about using the critical areas ordinance to address this. Do you still feel like that's a good option, or I guess did you feel like it was a good option before, and are you still there now?
Well, that's the way that most people do it. I mean, and that's actually one of the issues that kind of caused some of this. The concern was that you were regulating critical areas and protecting critical areas through your overlay, and said, well, those aren't critical areas regulations, and the Growth Management Hearings Board says it doesn't make a difference what you call them. They regulate critical areas, therefore they are. And so the nice thing about having it all in one section was it would be very clear that these are the regulations and this is the way we're going about it and doing the best of the little science, and it would just be more consistent with the way that they're used to seeing things and the way, frankly, most everybody else does it. Very few cities currently have the overlays structure that Bothell has, and that's not a criticism, it's just an observation, because it does add a lot of complexity. And one of the things, it's interesting, and we were talking about groundwater, is there are groundwater protection provisions and other overlays that are very similar, but they're just slightly different. And so you do it, sort of micromanage that through there. And we were saying you could restructure that and reduce the amount of code you have by having a groundwater protection section, and then pulling that in like we're talking about and just having it addressed, each area addressed within a larger code, then have the same basic language put over and over again in the same thing. So it's really getting to the same things as would be cleaner to do it. It's just like what you have a special provision for things in Horse Creek because of the special conditions in Horse Creek that are sort of on the other end of the spectrum because it's so constrained. But you could have the same thing, like these sections apply in these areas as part of 1404, instead of having it be an overlay. If you wanted to repeal that and do things. And that's where we were talking about things like tree protection. So you could, like currently there's obviously a protection for forests, which also protects trees in Fitzgerald overlay, and you also have a tree protection ordinance that addresses other things. You could put those together and do it on a citywide basis if that's what you wanted to do, or you could have a tree protection ordinance that protects trees differently in different areas. It's really just kind of where they are. And I think one of the issues on this, and this is my opinion, not necessarily fact, that's been demonstrated by everyone, but is that the way that this is structured is causing uncertainty and confusion. And I think that if we went ahead and pulled things together and put them in the sections that a lot of particularly developers are used to dealing with, the critical areas code and tree protection code and groundwater protection or grading requirements like you mentioned, there'd be just a little less confusion because it would be very clear how they address them. Like in the critical areas code, the nice thing about that is it says if you are impacting critical areas, this is how you deal with it. There's the provisions to avoid and mitigate, and how you go about it. There's a process. There's a critical area study that's done. There's demonstration of baseline conditions and impacts, and those are just things that we're used to dealing with for wetlands and stream buffers and everything. And so by including some of those forest provisions in there, they would still be regulated, but they'd be regulated in a way that we're very familiar with. We, meaning the regulated public, versus in the overlay structure that you currently have, which, well, you talk about it here and you talk about it here, and you got another section of code, and it's just really tough, and I got to make a business decision. And so you can do it either way. It would be more straightforward to do it in the code. So I guess that's my question. It would be the same regulation more or less.
Okay.
It's just a structural issue.
And then we had a comment earlier about the RCW and how it dealt with critical aquifer recharge areas. And I think I looked up the right RCW, but I don't, from what I understand, it's not limited to just drinking water, groundwater sources. There's actually a second part of the RCW that can be applied to groundwater at large or in general.
That is I am not into the RCW, the regulations. We'd have to probably defer to the attorney, but I read that as well. I think the way that your current code is written, it talks about that. Like you talk about water quality. I mean, I think that probably, again, if you said water quality and quantity, there could be additional protections provided, and that would be like we would get in with the gap analysis. That said, it says things like the director, I believe, and I'm not quoting directly from the code or from memory, but it says the director can require additional provisions to protect groundwater quality, and you could say things like groundwater quality and quantity, but then it doesn't say what those are. Again, it's just kind of out there. I mean, it's a nice backstop provision, but it doesn't really help address the issue specifically. Now, there's other ways to address that too, if you would like to, with the director's rule or however you want to go about doing that too, so.
Okay, those are my questions. Councilmember Freed?
Great. Well, I'd like to welcome back the citizens of Zone 1 back at the 2016 Hunger Games here in the Capitol. Thank you for joining us this evening. My hope is this council, I hold hope in this council that as this discussion goes on, that we do make a change that is reasonable. So based upon the conversation, a few of the comments tonight, I'm hoping that we're heading in that direction. It's been a long haul, many years. 31 acres is what we've been really talking about with Zone 1. The faces that we see here have been consistent regarding the 31 acres there in Zone 1 of the Nicochapa sub area. City of Bothell, 7,756. So we've been talking about 0.0039% for several years. Every ounce of the city of Bothell is an important part of the city, but I don't think that there's some magic soil or dirt or water infiltration that is going to control our entire environment in the city of Bothell with 0.0039%. I think what's right is to address it with the 2016 LID manual that's citywide. So my hope is this council can move forward with some consideration with a normal type zoning that is handled through what would be our normal critical area ordinance. I do have some questions. There was a comment during public comment of which Mr. David Bain talked about 20% of the area is impervious already. And then I look at the staff analysis that talks about several different scenarios that show that we go from 25.5% with 5400D, or 25.7% of 7,200, or 27.6% of impervious surface at 9,600. Have we really been arguing for 10 years about 5%?
Actually, it's probably less than that. The existing, when we talk about 20%, that's, and I'm going to get back to the same terms I used before, effective impervious surface, meaning that impervious surface that is not treated. The scenarios that we're showing are total impervious surface. So the hope would be that the effective impervious surface would be less than that.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, it's a few percentage points, but not the problem. The issue is that right at that 20%, and again, we're going to get back to best of all science and the limitations of best of all science, but there's sort of breaks that have been inferred that significant changes happen in watersheds. One's at 10, and another one's right at 20, which is why that's sort of a number that sticks out and we're looking at very closely because of that. But you're right, it could be relatively limited. I'll point out, though, that a few percentages in impervious surface, depending on when the rain occurs and how we design things, can result in a response in surface waters that could be disproportionately more,
Sure,
depending on the circumstances.
Dr. David Bain says we're at 20% already.
I believe that is true, yes. And
So
the
couldn't
current-
we already have an effective impervious coverage, even though we're saying impervious coverage 25%, we could have an effective impervious that doesn't even alter the current impervious surface.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, so I'll take this further and then maybe you can blend them together. My problem with the city's LID code is we don't count and want infiltration into the soil. So it seems that we don't put an importance on groundwater in the city of Bothell. We put an importance on clean stormwater and stormwater treatment. We don't really care about aquifers per our code. We may say that we do, but we don't implement code that actually does. So why don't we have an LID code that actually wants to see infiltration into our soils?
That's a good question.
I mean,
I think, and one of the things, again, Bruce, if I'm putting words in your mouth, let me know, but, it's kind of where we are in terms of, regulatory environment and science and where the state is. The state has mandated, remember 20 years ago, there were really very few regulations. Now they have a bunch of data, and because was mainly pollution, originally stormwater was mainly pollution prevention. It came out then to learn about the effects and changes that additional runoff has on surface water, just the volume. And so we've identified manuals that address that, and that was like the 2006 manual that had a lot of issues. It built big ponds that didn't really work. They were expensive. So we have the new LED manual that tries to address some things like that. And I think that because groundwater is such a complex issue, it's very expensive, and frankly, in most areas, surface water is the issue that drives a lot of the problems. Arguably, this is a little different in this one because groundwater is very important, but that's kind of where we are. But your point is well taken. I guess it depends on how far ahead of the curve do you want to be versus where the ecology and the MPDS requirements are, and but that's again a policy question, not so much.
Yeah, well, I think with the grand wisdom that we hold within this room, and with you and the consultants that you have, or employees that you have at your firm, hopefully we can find a way that development can still occur, because we are a city designated for growth. We are seeing growth come here, but hopefully we can find a way that puts an importance on groundwater infiltration, that we recharge our aquifers or whatever it might need to be. Yes, stormwater quality needs to be taken into consideration, but I think we need to have a real LID that talks about infiltration rather than we currently have design that doesn't want to see it really at all.
Yeah, and having looked ahead a little bit on where you are with your stormwater and some of the materials that are under your planning commission, I did review a lot of those. You're definitely moving in that direction, and I believe the new manual, I won't say the name because I don't want to confuse it, but
Sure.
will address a lot of those issues.
Okay, and then I heard a comment, I think our director mentioned we will allow something about a density credit for buffers. I just wanted to understand, you said not the wetland itself, but somehow with a buffer.
I understand that, but maybe the director should come up and, so I don't put words in his mouth.
It's more of a suggestion that you may want to consider as part of the regulation direction you give us, if that's a concern that can help the zoning regulations to move forward in concert with the environmental protections. I think that's a good trade-off.
Okay, and we would allow, could we create something that allows the buffers to be designed as that to count for infiltration? Does that?
So this is one of the issues, and this is one of the code inconsistency issues you have. Buffers are there to protect the wetlands or the streams that have functions and trees and everything.
Right.
Stormwater features are to protect, or to preserve surface water. And generally, and I don't know in the code, you're not supposed to put stormwater facilities in the buffers because then it detracts from the buffers. I have worked on projects in some unique circumstances, brownfield redevelopment, shoreline management, or where you have sites that has been done. Again, that's a code decision and a policy decision. I do know that similarly that there's some discussion of allowing stormwater facilities, particularly LID vegetated stormwater facilities, to serve as landscaping credits or screening. And so that would be a similar thing. I think the issue with having that be allowed as a code element across the entire city is that you want that to be focused on areas where it makes sense and you've already got a degraded buffer. And so you don't want to have to say, well, we can put anything in a buffer, and all of a sudden you're cutting down forest, which is functioning, and to build a stormwater facility, which is probably, even in the best circumstances, not as good as the forest that potentially you could be cutting down.
Yeah, but our forest doesn't even require it has trees in our definition, so I don't know what a forest is.
Well, that's what we're saying. I mean,
what is.
hopefully, we would be looking at addressing some of these inconsistencies, but right now, I don't believe that the city's code allows stormwater facilities and buffers.
No, something I think we should consider, and I think
Which is,
we
I
can.
think, one of the reasons why we're looking at that.
Yeah, I'm bringing up a lot of different things that I think need to be addressed that maybe we're not going to conquer tonight.
Councilmember Freed, I would just add that to do the on-site density transfer in a buffer would probably be linked to preservation of the forested area.
I would absolutely love to see that. I think it'd be right for the city of Bothell. I think we as environmentalists and property owners and free rights folks would like to see our buffers improve because we've seen a lot of degradation. And if we offer incentives or even allow that stormwater, I think there's a way collectively that we can win somewhat, like I think this council hopefully will be supportive from what the comments I've heard of a clustering ordinance, because I think it's good for all parties involved. I had one last question, but let me, have the staff receive any direction from the majority of the taxpayers for what the taxpayer of the property owners within that area, what they want? I mean, do we know what the property taxpayers in that area want?
Actually, yes.
Okay.
We, just give me a second, I'll pull it up. We received an email from Terry Clem late last week, and he's indicated that they're looking for a maximum net lot yield, removal of the overlay, allowing clustering and density transfer, and nothing experimental, something that's tried and true.
Yep.
Something that works for developers and property owners as well, and is reasonable environmental protection.
Great. Thank you, Director. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, seeing, nope, they're still good. Okay, so we're going to open it up to public testimony. I have a sign-up sheet with 2 names on it. The first one is Ann Agard.
It's been a long evening, and I had a fall when I was on a trip, so I'm a little stiff. Would you hand the copies out to the council now, please? I had 8 of them. Thank you, Council. I have read the agenda package and the different options that are before you. I'm going to address first the hybrid regulations, item E1, which suggests, as does the repeal section, addressing forest areas as critical areas available for surface water dispersion. Forest areas are not critical areas under GMA. And if they were to be treated as critical areas, as suggested in this memo, it would be necessary to use best available science in their preservation and treatment and identification. I'm opposed to using the forest areas as critical areas. However, I do support using a clear, definable definition of forest areas and preserving forest areas through clustering and subdivision approval. And I am specifically referencing an LID manual document that is before the Planning Commission that was put out by people for Puget Sound called Integrating LID into Local Code. And that manual strongly advises against using critical areas as part of your LID provisions. And I have the source for you to go onto the link, both from the Planning Commission current studies and or going directly onto the Puget Sound link. I've already provided you in an earlier memo, which is found on page 147, a clear definition of forest coverage. Another section regarding site and building design requirements. I point out that the 2016 LID Surface Water Manual is not designed to protect shallow aquifers, and this has been confirmed by the discussion that you just had. Secondly, I have attached different pages from this document. One shows a clustering suggestion, another shows how you might work clearing and grading standards to protect the shallow aquifer, and the third discusses how LID provisions could be integrated into the subdivision code. And I thought those were particularly useful suggestions, and I hope you will look at them. Finally, on the issue of appeal, and responding to your issue, Councilman Rayam, the GMA definition and the information that is found on the third page of my memo under critical aquifer recharge areas is taken from the Department of Ecology page on critical aquifer.
Could you wrap
recharge
up your
areas.
comments, please?
I am.
Thank you.
And you'll note that they specifically state that critical recharge effect on aquifers is defined as using potable water. I think it's unfortunate that that's the way it's been defined, but that is the way in that particular section of GMA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Next person.
Yeah.
The next person signed up is Terry Clem.
Good evening, Council. I just want to return for a little bit here to the pit test issue, and I brought this up before, but on page 142, and this is the same area that Council Member Doer was referring to, and there's a couple of errors in there that I'd like to point out, and the first one is they indicate that that the number of feet that they went down in the pit tests were 8 to 15. And it was actually 10 to 16 feet deep for the pit test. But more importantly was the ending of the statement where it said they went down until the operator excavating the test pits observed saturated soils. Saturated is not the right word to use in here, and saturated, as you know, means full of water. It means dripping. It means cannot contain any more water. What they should have described down there is something to the effect of they went down until they observed saturated soils and there was any evidence of water, is the way it should be stated in there. Because at 16 feet deep, there was no evidence of water. In 5 out of 9 of those pit tests, they were totally dry. 2 had groundwater seepage, was the word that they used, and 1 had a trickle of water. So trickle, seepage, and no groundwater is really vastly different than saturated. So I recommend that change be made. And also, this was done, those pit tests were done in April, a year ago, and Councilmember Durr ask about that age as maybe a year is a long time ago. Well, to just bring that up a little closer here, last week I introduced a slide that showed 2 more gigantic, in essence, pit tests that were being done. At the bottom of our hill, they're going in 90 feet straight into the hillside for a foundation, leaving 11-foot wall of dirt. There was no water in there, and that's at the bottom right at 39th. On the top of the hill on 45th, there's a vault being dug up there for a 97 home site building up there, 250 feet long, 45 feet wide, and 12 feet deep. No water. And those are currently going on and have been dug in the last 60 days. So just some information for the record. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. That's the end of the sign-up sheet. Is there anybody else who would like to provide? Please come up to the microphone and state your name for the record.
Andrea Perry. In response to changing the zoning in Zone 1, I would support changing it to R9600. I think that that's a good density designation change, not only because of the environmental protection, but of less development in this area, which is crucial. But there's also no existing infrastructure in the area to support over other high-density development impacts, including the increased traffic impact. In response to the option of taking the LID designation off of the Zone 1 properties within the NIC-Fuchapa, I'm trying to understand why that would be appropriate. It may be, but there has been no new best available science study that contradicts the study conclusions and recommendations that are based on the scientific data presented both in the 2004 Litowitz report from Pentec Environmental and the additional 2004 scientific analysis draft City of Bothell Wetland BAS report conducted by Stewart and Associates. What the city does have is the 2006 parametrics report that confirmed the importance of the hydrologically connected complex streams, wetlands, and other critical areas in these watersheds. So no matter what you decide as far as lifting the LID regulation for Zone 1, you're still going to have to provide regulatory approaches that must limit the water runoff as well as preserve the local groundwater infiltration from new development in order to avoid the stream erosion and the destabilization and continue to provide the groundwater inputs for low summer flows. These are regulations that are applicable to Zone 1 just as they are applicable to the other areas, the other zones in the NIC-Fuchapa. I would support exploring a clustering ordinance specifically for Zone 1. Not only could it allow for some flexibility in how that area is developed and advantages to developers and property owners and give clarity, it would also provide another method for protecting this unique hydrologically interrelated system that has already been scientifically proven to be a system with high order of ecological functions. In addition, what is of paramount importance is that the clustering approach does not turn into an opportunity to allow for significantly increased development in this area, which neither the infrastructure or the environment can support. If you decide to explore this option, I would ask you to consider the following. Ensure the clustering regulations require that it be demonstrated that such modification would result in a development which would not increase the density and intensity of land use beyond that which would be allowed if no regulations were modified as per your PUD regulations provided in BMC 12.30.010. Also, I strongly suggest, as strongly suggested, and I'm wrapping up, by the Central Puget Sound Growth Management Hearings Board in the FDO of AGARD 3 regarding the modifications within the size modifications within the LID, that in the interest of clarity for property owners, neighbors, and the hearing examiner, the board suggests the city consider assembling lot modification criteria in a director's rule, perhaps including the negative criteria. And I'll leave it at that, and I'll turn this in so that you can read it later.
Thank you. Gentleman in the back there, please state your name for the record.
Thank you. My name is Bob Vick. I'm with Sunquist Homes, Phoenix Development. I thank the council for the diligence in taking this issue up. I think it's been about 10 years. I thought I'd just go through from a developer's perspective what we would support, what looks good to us from a development standpoint as it relates to Zone 1 up on the hill. The suggestion that the environmental zone could be lifted or overlay could be lifted makes sense. Use the current codes that you have. Use modifications if you need to. I think what Mr. Clem has given you is good evidence that the groundwater issue isn't as significant as you might have thought it was. When we do a development, we have to go in and do a geotech report that's pretty extensive, a grid pattern across the site. We would be concerned, as you would, about groundwater. We can't have groundwater running through our buildings. We've got to determine what the groundwater situation is. So any application on the hillside would have an extensive groundwater or geotech report. I'd suggest to you that because of the types of things we're talking about, clustering, that a 7,200 zone is appropriate over a 9,600 zone. That you take the counsel of Mr. Burdett's suggestion that you incorporate, not just in Fitzgerald, but throughout the city of Bothell, look at maybe considering the idea of taking some of the buffers and using that to achieve an overall site density. It certainly, it's done all the time in the county and other municipalities. One of the issues that's been raised is the cuts for the roads and such. It's almost impossible to do a project under your current code to make the cuts necessary to actually develop the site. It's virtually stupid to go up on the hill and try and do that. Not only is the cut part of the problem, but your current code says that you can't clear outside of your building pad. You have to leave that in a natural state. The idea that was presented in one of the workshops was pin piles, so that the water flow goes under the house and nothing gets disturbed around it. That's just an experiment. That's not a marketable product. The idea of retaining forest area in other municipalities is done through incentive. It's the idea of retaining forest to achieve an impervious calculation makes sense. But everything has an economy to it if you're a developer. So if you're trying to achieve retaining forest intact, then there should be some offset in terms of how we get to a density calculation. I think that just real quick, like the pathway for critters on that hillside goes up to a dead end. So is it that important that we bring the critters to a dead end and stop? Or can we work with the pathways for the critters and work those out of the code? With regards to the roads issues that was just raised, Public Works makes those decisions. I mean, we have to work with Public Works on any any kind of project we ever do, decide how many cars are going to go down the road and make improvements as necessary. But I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to provide public comment? Please come up and state your name for the record.
Good evening, Tom Berry. I want to plead with you to give us something after all these years that allow a developer to understand, to move forward. Listening to this tonight, I have little hope, frankly. I really do. There's a non-governmental organization that refuses to see Zone 1 for what it actually is, and we've done everything we can. In fact, the city's even, thank you, the city, come out and clean the ditch, which I thought was kind of funny. After I mentioned that the scant water coming down from the aquifer was on the road surface, hard surface, and they cleaned out the culverts. Thanks again. That was nice. The scant amount of water is still very plain to see. You can visit it. I'll put a folding chair out there for you if you like. It goes south, and Coal Creek is north. And Coal Creek flows from Snohomish County, where all the development has taken place. And Zone 1 doesn't have the outflow that you find elsewhere. I've hiked that whole ridge from Woodinville north years ago, again and again and again. I know where the springs are. They're not in Zone 1, and they never will be. So that's all I have to say, and thanks.
Please state your name for the record.
Brian Pearson, Bothell resident, Zone 1. It just strikes me that there's a lot of concern over the unknowns and what's going to happen and how can we protect. And it seems, hearing from people that do this for a living, people that are experts in the field, there are provisions in place to handle that as you get to it. In other words, it's not like you can go in and rip out an aquifer as it's discovered through pit tests. You've got to work around it. And there's provisions for, surface water or whatever the case may be. It's not like you're going into this project blind and hoping that you don't destroy the environment, but you might end up doing it anyhow. There are protections already in place that can prevent that from happening. And the percentages that Councilmember Freed referred to, there's a reference in here to 6% of the North Creek flow coming from all of the Fitzgerald sub-area, I think is the way the parametric study reads. 6% of the whole sub-area. We're a part of the sub-area in Zone 1, and so whatever that works out to, and most of it is, Mr. Barry indicated, doesn't even go to North Creek anyhow. So I would just encourage you to move forward with the protections, adopt an R7200, keep it clean and simple and understandable, remove the complexity that has so characterized this area. That's why we're still here, because we've adopted complex solutions to the situation that haven't solved the problem. So an R7200 solution that staff spells out for Zone 1, removing the LID overlay as it stands today would be our strong recommendation. So thank you.
Please come up and state your name for the record.
Patrick Ewing. So when I spoke to you at the last meeting, I urged you to complete the best available science study to give you perhaps better guidance in moving forward. And I understand the reaction that I got was, that's just a lot more time and money that we don't have. So in lieu that we have already paid for in the past, many studies when these codes were put in place in the past, we have these studies. The public has already paid for them. Staff is referring to them over and over again. Can we please get these into the record so that you can at least use the science that we have paid for so that it can guide you and the public can understand what the staff is referring to? So the documents I'd like to have you guys put into the record is the 2006 parametrics report, the 2004 Stewart and Associates Best Available Science Study, and the 2004 Litowitz Study. Thank you.
Is there any more public comment? Please state your name for the record.
I'd like to use the overhead. What do I have to do? Okay. Good evening, Council. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. I have read the staff report as much as I could understand. I thought it was pretty dense and complicated, but and you have my sympathy for having to deal with that. When I spoke to you some time ago, I did put this up about the sales of properties in the Fitzgerald area, and since that time there's been some new ones that I've learned about. Former Councilmember Evans sold his house this year. He asked $600,000, he got $650,000, sold in 5 days. This property down here, 2.5 acres, is still pending. It hasn't yet closed, but that's a very recent sale on the farm house that you heard reference to about the wall and the excavation. And then 2 additional houses along that upper part sold fairly recently. I want to suggest that these properties up here are on 1 acre. And frankly, well, before I get to that, I'm glad tonight, finally, I heard some discussion of the topography there. I've been out there. I mean, I know these people live there. They know it really well. I've been out there as well. It's steep going up the hill. And it seems crazy to me to have high density, well, I'll consider high density zoning up on the slope of the hill, when in the valley, we've got 9,600 or 40,000. So I'm going to urge you to at least go no less than 9,600. In fact, I would like to see 40,000, but I'd be happy with 9,600. The final thing I'd like to ask is the staff recommends that tonight you close the public hearing. I don't understand why you'd want to do that. You got more work to do on this subject. I urge you to continue the public hearing, and when the staff comes back, we just pick up and go from there. I see no need or reason to close the public hearing, and I ask you not to do so. Thank you.
Is there any further public comment? Please state your name for the record.
Yeah, George Merritt, one of the property owners up there. I just urge you that you don't go any higher than 7,200. Right now we're at 5,400, and you start going any higher than 7,200. It just doesn't work for developers to be able to go up there and run the sewers and all the infrastructure that has to go in. So, you know, there's no sense in making a zoning change if nothing's going to happen again. Also, you know, we're going from 5,400. So, you know, we're going the wrong way as far as the property owners are concerned. But if you lift the LID and don't go any more than 7,200, developers can possibly make it work. And, you know, because they're not going to come in and develop on a very large lots and bring sewers in, and you don't want houses built on septics. So anyway, I'd also like credit for the wetland buffers and actually possibly some of the wetland, depending on how much is required to be forested. Partly because I own a piece of property that has a fair amount of wetlands on it. Right now it has a lot of value under the code because it's counted towards the density. If I lose that, I'm going to lose a lot of value on my property. But anyway, I urge you to at least do something that's going to make it work for the developers. Otherwise, nothing will happen. Thank you.
Any further public comment? All right. Come up and state your name for the record.
I'm Craig Bernhardt. This is an interesting dilemma for the city of Bothell. There's a chance for Bothell to build a model 31-acre development and have total control and something that Bothell can be proud of. And what's going to happen if the zoning is not appropriate for the developers to come in and make it work? It's going to be hodgepodge. Little pieces will be sold off and you will have a mess that you can never straighten out. That's all I have to say.
Any further public comment? Come up and state your name for the record.
Mr. Mayor, may I make a motion to extend the meeting to 10:30?
Moved by Councilmember Sandberg, seconded by, I think, everybody to extend till 10. They'll say Councilmember Agnew till 10:30. Please your vote. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. You have the floor.
I just came from the hospital and my son was hurt in an accident today. And this is going to happen more and more often because he has no sense of where he is in the world. Messed up his face. He had to have all kinds of stitches and he's hurting really bad. We need help. We need our property to sell. And I think this group here, I don't think they're in this for the fight. I don't understand how the 31 acres is going to destroy North Creek. I don't understand it. Have you ever looked at the Beardsley Crossing? They're closer to North Creek than our property is, and that's a heck of a development there. And if you look right behind us on the property line where Snohomish is building a huge environment, how is that different than what taking one step onto our property? They're affecting I can't, we can't do this any longer. We just can't.
Any further public comment? Nope. Okay. So we're going to move into the council deliberation and direction to staff and the consultant team. So what I understand, the choice that we need to make tonight is between the three options. And I guess we can add additional, is that correct, Mr. Blackburn?
You got it. Correct. Yes, thank you.
And that's as far as we need to go tonight?
Yes, please.
Okay. So if each council member could give, well, actually, we're going to take a vote on it anyways, right? We need to take a vote on this? I believe so, because there's a resolution that was in my packet that I need to sign, that we choose one of these three options to move forward with. So a motion would be ordered, or if you guys want to deliberate and discuss, we can do that as well. Councilmember Sandberg.
Because it's late, I'll go first. Can staff put up the next slide that gives more detail on hybrid regulations, please? Okay, thank you. So as I spoke previously, I am in support of removing the LID regulations from the Zone 1 area with the expectation that the 2014 Ecology LID Surface Water Manual is such an improvement over our existing manual that that will provide protection. With one caveat, and that is I'm concerned that the LID manual, the DOE manual, doesn't provide the kind of protection that this area warrants in terms of tree retention or forest cover retention or tree canopy or whatever that definition is. And I'll come to that. I'll come to that in a minute. And so when I look at these options to consider, I agree with bullet number 1, remove the Zone 1, remove the LID regulations from Zone 1. And I am in support of assigning a 9600 zoning classification to Zone 1 with the expectation that we are going to develop a clustering mechanism for that area. And as I've said previously, I don't care how small the lots are. I don't think lot circles and widths and those requirements should apply. I don't care how small the lots get in that area if we cluster, as long as when clustering, we are preserving the trees / forest / canopy, whatever. And one of the speakers said that we need to retain forest area through incentive. And I think allowing clustering in that area makes it special, not LID special, but clustering special from a clustering perspective and then use that to retain forest area. And I think in clustering as well, we achieve that second objective, which is to reduce impervious area. So clustering that allows, that retains trees and just by its design reduces the impervious area. I like the craft out, the opt-out option for the large lots. I'm not in support of removing the LID regulations from anywhere else in the NCFU-CHAPA because no one else is asking for that. So there's that little slice that's west of 39th, which is currently 5400A. I think that should also be 9600 as the staff has reported in their their staff report. And I think when you look at the zoning map, there is a logical flow from North Creek and our zoning regulations from 40,000 LID to 9,600 LID, and then east of 39th, 9,600, with its own special provision, which is the clustering provision. That leaves the groundwater recharge or the groundwater resources, because I think that surface water resources are much better protected. And there's not enough money in our budget to characterize the groundwater resources. And there's no guarantee that even if we did characterize the groundwater resources, that we would be able to craft language to protect it. So I am then making the assumption that the combination of the R9600 zoning and the new LID manual with existing regulations will provide a measure of protection for that area that is consistent with the protection that we provide citywide. So that's sort of what, I don't like the word hybrid regulation, because that makes it sound like this area is still getting special treatment. And I think with this direction, we're trying to treat it more consistently like the citywide regulations. And if I don't know what the net buildable area is of that 31 acres, I forgot to ask that, because in our development regulations, if for example, we could cluster, you're not really talking about an R9600 lot, you're talking about 4 units per acre. And in our construct, it's 4 units per net acre. And so if you remove 20 acres, I don't know how much of that is identified critical area. I still feel like in that 20 acres, or I mean, if you move 10 acres, a third of that, in that 20 acres remaining of net buildable area, you're looking at an 80 home development that should be able to support the provision of infrastructure. So that's why I don't support the R7200. And I think that we're talking about moving towards something that is clear. We have to come to some agreement on what this tree or forest or canopy definition is, because every time I read it, my eyes glaze over and I stop. So as long as we have clear definitions, we remove that complexity, which is what I heard. I think we have a defensible approach to show the Growth Management Hearings Board, or to demonstrate that we've used best available science, updated regulations to protect the function and value of this area with this change. Thank you.
Yep. Is there any further discussion or a motion? Councilmember Agnew?
I agree with most of what Councilmember Sandberg said. I think we need to remove the Zone 1 or the hillside area from any special overlay. And I would like the zoning classification to go no lower than R7200, though. I think the remaining Zone 1 lands can be R96 and R40,000. And I also agree with the opt-out exception for the large lots.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Freed?
I agree with Councilmember Agnew's comments regarding 7200 and the balance of the comments made by Councilmember Sandberg. I do have a question, if you would allow, Chair. I didn't hear Councilmember Sandberg make comment on the buffers. I don't know if you'd allow her to make comment again on that or not.
Just because it's already 10:05, can we?
Maybe it can happen in a motion.
Yeah, it probably could happen in a motion. Any further discussion on the item? Councilmember McNeil?
I also agree with Councilmember Sandberg, parts of Agnew and Freed. I am supportive of removing the Zone 1 hillside area. I also would support the 9600 zoning. And the clustering would be, figuring out the clustering would be a big thing for me as well.
All right, well, without further, well, we can keep going, but we have some direction from the majority of council about going with the hybrid approach. But Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
In the interest of compromise, I would support R 8400.
Can you elaborate a little bit about what you're talking about?
Well, we've got 2 people for 7,200. We have 2 for R 9600, and I guess I'm suggesting a compromise of R 8400. Everything else I agree with.
Okay, has everybody had a chance to talk? So is there a motion? Councilmember Sandberg?
I make a motion that we direct staff to craft language that removes the Nick Fuchapa LID overlay from the Zone 1 area east of 39th Avenue, that we assign a zoning classification of R9600 with provisions for clustering that prioritize preservation of trees, existing forest, canopy, etc., whatever that definition may be. And that we craft the opt-out exception for large lots, and that the slice between just west of 39th be rezoned from 5400 to R9600 with the LID provision there. Did I capture everything I said before?
Is that basically everything that's on the screen here? Except that you want it to be 9600 east of 39th?
Yeah, an R9600 clustering.
And clustering is something that you want to have be part of this?
Yeah,
Okay.
an R96 clustering.
Is
And
there-
I have specifically, I've specifically left out discussion of buffers or critical areas, because that, to me, is a citywide discussion on how we treat our critical areas and our buffers. And I think that's something separate that if we chose to, we could address that in the critical areas regulations, but that's not a part of my motion.
That's the longest motion I think I've ever heard in my 4.5 years. Do we have a second? Any second? Councilmember McNeil seconds the motion. Any discussion on the motion? The motion is basically what you see on the screen here, except it'd be 9600 east of 39th Avenue Southeast, with clustering is also part of the hybrid regulations consideration. And I think that's it, right? Okay. Councilmember Freed, discussion on the motion.
Absolutely. I could support the majority of the comments that were made. I would like to make an amending motion to go to a R7200 zoning.
And we're talking about east of the 39th?
Thank you.
Okay. So there's been a amending motion and a second to amend the underlying motions that east of 39th is R7200.
Yep. It's interesting, speaking to my motion.
Yes.
The R9600 actually has a higher impervious surface percentage than the R7200, which I thought was interesting. But staff put this together in answer to Deputy Mayor's question. So I'm certainly in favor of that. I think a lot of the information was brought forward tonight. Councilmember Ewing, former Councilmember Ewing brought to several documents that the city's had for its use. So there's been a lot of thought, a lot of science that's gone into this area, and a lot of the calculations that are included here are based upon those comments. So I hope that there will be support to go to R7200.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion, Councilmember Sandberg?
I'll be voting against it, and I did want to point out that those calculations of impervious area with the scenarios were based on our lot circle requirements that exist in current code. So if we were able to cluster with 9600, we could probably achieve lower impervious areas because you wouldn't be limited by lot circles.
Any further discussion on the amending motion? We're beaten down. Okay. Well, I'm gonna make one comment, and that is that I really don't think we should try to assign a zoning to this area, the area east of 39th right now, and let staff come back with the hybrid analysis done in September. So I'm not going to support the motion. It's not that I support one zone over the other. It's simply that I don't think we need to make that decision tonight. So go ahead and place your vote. No would be to, or I mean, a yes would be to have the underlying motion changed to allow 7,200 east of 39th Avenue. Fails 4-2 with Councilmember Agnew and Councilmember Freed in the negative and Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. So we're back to the underlying motion. Councilmember Freed.
Yeah, just for clarity from the chair, I thought we were making a decision with hybrid or one of the three choices with the detail, but you're saying we should have just set the direction of one of the three?
The resolution that I'm supposed to sign tonight, we're just supposed to pick one of the three options. And we don't have to specify which zoning east of 39th is going to be assigned tonight.
Oh, okay.
In the slide that was on there, I don't know if you can go back out of the voting thing and show the slide.
Because I would have made some amending motions regarding including buffers and talking about groundwater to allow infiltration in our code, but you're saying that we don't have to make that decision tonight. It's really just the direction of one of these three.
Yes, sir. That's what I understand is what council or staff needs direction on.
Okay.
So we do have the underlying motion that does assign R9600 east of 39th. That's the only change that was done to the slide. That's basically what we're trying to accomplish here. So is there any further discussion on the motion? Councilmember McNeil?
So can we make an amending motion to not include the zoning?
You can always make an amending motion.
Well, I'd like to make amending a motion then.
Okay.
That does not include, the same motion just does not include the zoning at this time.
The zone, okay. I'll second that. So there's an amending motion to pass the underlying motion with one change, and that is to remove the zoning designation for east of 39th. Is there any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Freed.
Just for clarification, Councilmember Steinberg also mentioned zoning to the west of 39. Are you excluding that as well for this time?
Yes, all zoning. Yeah.
All zoning. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. All zoning. I'll still second it. Any further discussion on the motion? Councilmember, Deputy Mayor.
I think we should only leave out the zoning for Zone 1 and then vote on keep intact the motion regarding outside of Zone 1. Does that make sense?
I don't know.
I can't see it on the screen anymore.
Can you bring back the slide and take it out of the voting machine?
Okay.
There's the slide.
So my amending motion would be to remove Zone 1 from what the dot says. Take out assigning a zoning classification for Zone 1. Keep the zoning for areas in the sub-area the same.
So the third bullet, you want to
Yes,
keep
the
those
third
zoning
bullet.
assignments in the
And the fourth bullet. So everything
Okay.
but the second bullet.
or at least keep the options open for the second
Right.
bullet.
Yes,
Is that
keep
what
the
you're
options-
saying? Okay.
Yes.
Point of order, there is a motion already on the table.
I thought
And
I was
seconded, but
making-
you can make an amending motion. Once you
I
have
was
a-
making-
To an amending motion?
Can't you amend an amending motion?
You can make an amendment to an amending motion.
That's what I was
Yeah, we're
doing.
getting tricky at 10:30 at night, aren't we? I'm going to second the amending motion to allow the zoning options for the second bullet that we're looking at right now and leave the other zoning in place for the other two bullets. Does that make sense? Can you take it out of the voting thing and bring the slide back up, please?
So let's clarify each bullet if we may, Mayor.
Go ahead, use your mic there.
I had it on.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't think you did. Okay, so the original amending motion was to clear all zoning out of the underlying motion. The amending motion is to leave in the zoning for everything here except leave the options, well, basically leave everything here. Isn't that basically what you're saying? So you have the three options there are 5,400, 7,200, 9,600 in the second bullet. Your amending motion was to remove all zoning from the motion. And Councilmember Sandberg's motion had information about the 40,000, the 9,600, and the R40,000 that are outside of east, or that are west of 39th. Councilmember Sandberg?
I understand the amending motion, but I'm still going to vote no on it because I think we need to take direction so that they can respond to it. They can have the kind of cross conversation about what they live and can't live with. So I'm voting no on it.
Okay. Any further discussion on the amending motion? All right, let's place our votes. Keep the vote until the operator. That fails, 3-3, with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. So we're back to the amending motion, which is to remove zoning from the underlying motion in its entirety. Any further discussion on the amending motion? Councilmember Freed.
I can't recall. I don't think I've spoken to the amending motion yet. My understanding of the amending motion made by Councilmember McNeil is just to not make a decision on what the zoning is going to be this evening. That's my understanding of what the amending motion is.
That is correct, and that was
Okay.
my intent.
So that's for all, just for the area east of 39th.
Can you put it back up, please? It is for bullet point number 2, and bullet point number 3, and bullet point number 4. We're just not making a decision.
Okay, so does that help you? Okay, so are we ready to vote on the amending motion to remove zoning from the underlying motion? Fails 4-2 with Councilmember McNeil and Freed in the affirmative and Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. So now we're down to the underlying motion, which is Councilmember Sandberg's motion, which basically was the bulleted list assigning R9600 to east of 39th and not leaving the three options. Any further discussion on the motion? Does everybody understand what we're doing voting wise? Okay. No, okay, so we're ready to vote. So the motion is to pass the hybrid approach, assigning R9600 east of 39th. Fails 3-2 with Councilmember Sandberg and Councilmember Freed in the affirmative and Councilmember Spivey absent and excused.
I believe it fails 4-2.
Or fail, did I say passes?
You said it failed 3-2.
Oh, I'm sorry, failed 4-2. Thank you. Well, do we have another motion, or are we
We
done?
need to make a motion. We're
Okay.
not leaving here until we vote
Yeah,
on a motion.
that'd be appreciated.
Because
Thank
these
you.
people have been sitting here for hours and they need some direction from us.
Yes.
So can we have a little bit more discussion on how we can get a motion on the floor?
Do you have a motion you'd like to
I do,
propose?
if we can go back to that screen.
Councilmember Freed.
I make a motion that we have staff bring back these hybrid options, but this is the direction of council, item number 2.
Without the direction of council?
Without the direction of zoning, they're going to bring back more detail on that.
Okay.
As you stated, I think earlier,
Yeah.
which our decision should have been tonight.
Yes, okay, so it's moved and seconded, or moved by Councilmember Freed, seconded by Councilmember McNeil, that we basically pass what is on the screen now as the hybrid regulations proposed by staff.
Correct.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Sandberg.
What's on the screen does not include a clustering provision
No, it does not.
to prioritize tree retention.
That's
So
right.
I'll make an amending motion then to provide for clustering that prioritizes tree retention.
Moved by Councilmember Sandberg, seconded by Deputy Mayor to take the recommended action from staff and add clustering for additional tree retention. Additional tree retention, is that what we said?
Yeah.
Okay. Any discussion on the amending motion? Councilmember Freed.
It goes on because things keep on changing. I'm absolutely highly in favor of clustering. I think the majority of, if I get the sense, are. The problem is we're putting a requirement on an area that we don't even have a code for yet. I think once we get to a clustering ordinance, it's going to be citywide and will apply in this area. Please take the floor and correct me if I'm wrong.
And my concern is that a clustering ordinance is months off in the future. We could start with a clustering provision right here.
Okay.
And so if we wait for it to go citywide, we could be waiting the same length of time for a tree retention ordinance and all sorts of other things.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amending motion, which is to take the staff recommendation and add clustering for tree retention? Seeing none, place your vote. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. So we're back to the underlying motion. Any further discussion on the underlying motion? Seeing none, place your vote. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. So we have 4 more public hearings to accomplish tonight, and we have 4 minutes to do so. So, well, we have 6 minutes. So would somebody make a motion to extend?
Move to extend to 11.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Sandberg, seconded by Councilmember or Deputy Mayor to extend to 11. Sure that won't be enough time, but please, is there further discussion on the discussion? No, please vote. Passes unanimously. Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. Interim City Manager, please help us.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I just was conferring with the Public Works Director, and I mean, we do have the meeting on Tuesday night. We've got some deferred business to that. So a couple of these items, you may see if there are people here from the public who have comment, maybe you take those comments. And then if you want to act on them tonight, you can. But the condemnation of property relating to signal improvements, relating to the 522 project, sewer replacements, all of those could be deferred for action, but you might be able to take care of them quickly this evening, depending on what the comment is. And then the impact fee issue, we just need to get that adopted by September 1. So that could go to next week as well.
Okay, and is Don Ranger still here? Oh, poor guy. Okay, and then, so I guess I'm sure all the staff are still here. So you guys want to try to plug a couple of these out and see how it goes? All right, so we're moving on to AB 16-131, which is a public hearing to consider, oh wait, before we move on, could I have a motion to either close or extend the public hearing? Now, I wanted to point out, though, that we were going to have a second public hearing on the Fitzgerald area in September. So we were going to close, the staff recommendation was to close this public hearing and then open a new one, but we can extend or close it, doesn't matter.
Move to continue the public hearing on Fitzgerald to the meeting in September.
Second.
It's moved by Councilmember Sandberg, seconded by Councilmember Agnew to leave the public hearing open until sometime in September. Let's place your vote. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. Now, we're on to AB 16-131, which is a public hearing ordinance initiating condemnation of property needed for the 228th Street Southeast and 29th Drive Southeast traffic signal intersection improvements. And we have, I'm going to officially open the public hearing, and we have a staff presentation by Don Ranger.
All right, thank you. I'll be very brief here. This is a condemnation ordinance in support of a small property acquisition for the 29th Drive signal project. This is a just-in-case scenario in case negotiations fall apart with the property owner, that we have this tool in our toolbox. We do not have any reason to believe they will fall apart, but that we just want to get this out of the way in case we do, so we can continue to secure the federal funds that we do have. With that,
that was a great presentation. Do you have a map showing the area?
I do.
Thank you.
This is the intersection of 228th Street Southeast and 29th Drive. It's one of 3 entrances to the Canyon Park Business Park, located north of this point, and the only one that exits to the south onto 228th Street. The property in question is on the northwest corner of this intersection. It looks and feels and operates like right-of-way today. It is a sidewalk. It is a public improvement, but it was not dedicated as public right-of-way.
Okay, great. I have nobody signed up for public comment. Is there anybody in the public that would like to provide comment? Seeing none, a motion and a vote to close the public hearing is in order. Moved by Councilmember Agnew, seconded by Councilmember McNeil to close the public hearing. Please place your votes. Passes unanimously. Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. Council deliberation or a motion to consider the recommended action.
Second.
Councilmember Agnew moves, Deputy Mayor seconds to adopt the proposed ordinance initiating condemnation of property needed for public use for the 228th Street Southeast and 29th Drive Southeast traffic signal and intersection improvement project. Any deliberation, discussion on the motion? Councilmember Sandberg?
I'll be supporting the motion. I just want to point out that whenever the public hears condemnation, they think that's the heavy hand of government coming down. And there are benefits to the property owner for the city to go through these proceedings. So I'm sure that that's going to be an agreeable solution, and condemnation does confer tax advantage to the property owner.
Yes, it does. I'd also like to point out too that that intersection is probably one of the worst ones on 228th, and I've gotten lots of public comment about how bad it needs to be fixed, and I'm very thankful that this project's moving forward. Please place your vote. Is there any more discussion on the motion? Seeing none, place your vote. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. Next agenda item is AB 16-132. It's a public hearing to consider adoption of ordinance initiating condemnation of property needed for the SR 522 Stage 3 Improvements Project. I officially open the public hearing and ask staff Jason Torrey to provide presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council. I will also be brief for you. This is the same type of condemnation action required for our 522 Stage 3 project. This project will be finishing essentially the bat lanes all the way from 96 Wayne Curve intersection to 83rd and Kenmore, as well as building a sidewalk on the north side, the regional Burke-Gilman trails on the south side. So once again, we will be exhausting all our efforts to negotiate with the property owners as much as possible, and this is one extra tool to keep our schedule on point as we look to advance the project to construction.
Great. Do you have a map of the area that is quite subject to the condemnation?
Yes. We'll use this one. So this map also has several of the other phases on it, but the section in red there labeled 522 Stage 3 is the current project.
And that the whole thing needs a condemnation?
Yeah, there are 12 properties along there that are affected by it.
Okay. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment? Or I'm sorry, to close the public hearing? It's moved by Councilmember McNeil, seconded by Councilmember Agnew to close the public hearing. Please place your vote. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent excused. Deliberation or a motion to pass the staff recommendation. Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions. So are we working with Kenmore to continue that back beyond 83rd?
The bat lane's already constructed west of 83rd for both the eastbound and the westbound traffic.
Okay, perfect. And then on that map, 83rd, does 83rd have a crosswalk that comes across 522?
It does. It goes across to the eastbound bus stop.
Okay, and then the next one east of there would be the one at Wayne Curve?
Correct, at 96.
Okay, and is there any plans to do anything in the middle of those two?
Currently, the city is studying the potential for a mid-block crosswalk somewhere in the 91st area.
Okay.
We're studying for safety as well as feasibility and constructability of that to support an eastbound bus stop as well as trail access.
Fantastic, thank you.
Any further questions of staff? Or a motion is fine.
I move the recommended action.
It's moved by Deputy Mayor Dewar, seconded by Councilmember Agnew to adopt the proposed ordinance initiating condemnation of certain property needed for public use for the State Route 522 Stage 3 Improvements Project. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, place your vote. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. We are flying. We're into, we did close the public hearing on that, didn't we? Okay, good. Sorry, it's getting late. All right. AB 16-133, public hearing to consider adoption of ordinance initiating condemnation of property needed for the promontory sewer replacement project. Opening the public hearing. We have Regina, Durda, thank you, with the Public Works Department to provide a presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Public Works is working on an acquisition of utility easements needed for the promontory sewer repair project. Project will construct 580 feet of sanitary sewer pipe in a new location, replacing this 460 feet of sanitary sewer damaged by the 2012 landslide event. The proposed location of the replacement sewer main is situated to avoid the slide area and to minimize ground disturbances and tie into an existing fed gravity sewer line. The requested easement crosses several parcels belonging to two separate property owners. The city has been in regular contact since 2013 with the two property owners that were impacted in order to negotiate for property rights. The city will continue to negotiate with the parties to complete the necessary utility easement acquisition before proceeding with condemnation. Public Works Department will advise council of any further condemnation action if pursued.
Okay, is there any public comment for this one? Seeing none, is there a motion? Oh, there is one. Great. Please come up and state your name for the record.
Yes, Pete Schnebley. And let's see, now I'm not clear. Were you asked to proceed with an ordinance for eminent domain or was, what's the issue that we're asking you to make a decision on?
We're being asked to pass an ordinance that initiates condemnation of certain property needed for the public use of the promontory sewer repair project.
Okay. So we've been in negotiation with the city on this for a couple of years now. And we were making good progress on this. Suddenly we find that we receive a registered mail notice that says they're going to exercise eminent domain to get the right of way that they're requesting. We thought we were making progress on this thing until this came up. It seems to me that we ought to continue with the negotiations there. The original plan was to do this construction this summer during the dry season. The city's now telling us they're not going to do the construction this year. They're going to wait till next year. So I would say, well, then let's just continue, wrap up these negotiations in the next couple months, and there'd be no need for the city to get involved in a eminent domain action.
Thank you. Okay. Is there any further comment, public comment? Seeing none, could I have a motion and vote to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Sandberg, seconded by Councilmember McNeil to close the public hearing. Please, any deliberate discussion? Nope, seeing none, place your vote. Passes 5-1 with Councilmember Freed in the negative and Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. Council deliberation. Councilmember Freed.
Great. This was an issue that was brought up 2 years ago, as mentioned, and the issue at the time, from my understanding, was it was going to be a gift to public funds if we made the sewer repair. So is this the way that we're getting around the gift to public funds, doing sewer repair on private property by the eminent domain issue, so we'd actually take ownership of the land? Is this the same issue that was raised 2 years ago?
I'm going to have Ms. Dawn Fink answer that one.
It's a public sewer.
But it runs on private property.
Yes, we have an easement. We're currently under, that went through the landslide area, and then it got damaged during the slide event. So now we're going a different direction, so we need an easement.
Okay, so my understanding, as I recall from 2 years ago, it might be the wrong understanding, that it was a private and we couldn't make repairs because it would be a gift to public funds. And so is this not the issue from 2 years ago?
No, the storm line is private, and Promontory is undertaking that themselves.
Maybe that's it. Is that right, Director? We discussed it.
Councilmember Freed, I remember the same thing, and I thought about the same thing, and it was the storm line that was causing the problem, and then the sewer line was involved, and so we're moving our sewer line out of the way.
Okay, that helps. Thanks, Don.
Sure.
Councilmember Sandberg.
So did we miss the construction window this year because negotiations for property acquisition weren't completed?
Currently, yeah, if everything was perfect at this moment, we still would miss the construction window because of the advertisement requirement and then the actual construction contract being brought to you in mid to late September. It's 30 working days, maybe 40 working days, and so we would be into October, which is a wet season, and on that particular location, that's not advisable.
Okay. I guess I want to ask some questions about the nature of the negotiations, why they haven't completed, but I guess that probably isn't appropriate for on the dais if it's a litigation matter.
And there is potential litigation involved in, I guess it's a little more complex than just this section of land. There's also a downhill easement that we need to procure. Those negotiations are also underway. I've spoken with their attorney today to try and secure that portion of it. So there are essentially 2 easements that we need to get in order to complete this. And at different times, both of those negotiations have stalled. I am also in contact with Irv Sonkin, the attorney for the Promontory HOA, waiting to hear back on our latest proposal.
So what do you think of the option proposed, which is to, since we're missing our construction window anyway, to continue in negotiations?
That's part of the ordinance, direct staff to continue in good faith with negotiations to try and reach a resolution if at some point there's an absolute stall and that we've reached an impasse. Then we'd proceed with the condemnation. But the intent always is to get a negotiated resolution with the property owners that's amenable to both parties.
Thank you.
Any further deliberation on this? I just want to point out to the gentleman that did speak that this is like a belt and suspenders approach, and they will continue negotiating with you in good faith. The point of having eminent domain is that if negotiations do fall apart, we still need to build the sewer to support the Promontory wastewater system. So it's just the typical operation that we do whenever. I think we do this every time we try to get property for an easement. Is that a fair statement? I can't remember any time we haven't done this in any projects.
It's typically not done every time. As we enter into the negotiation, some go better than others. But at some point, time becomes critical. Usually it becomes very critical when we have outside funding like federal funds. There's a certain timeline we need to meet, and if we don't meet certain timelines, we can lose those grant funding. When it's our own local money, we have a lot more leeway. That's why probably we've been working at this for a few years. In a federal situation, we wouldn't have that luxury because the grant funder would have said, you haven't spent my money, turn it back to me. But again, we do try to go through the process, and at some point we need to move forward because the condemnation process takes a little while as well. And we want to make sure we get it done next summer because we've missed a couple seasons already.
Is that due to the negotiations? Okay. Any further deliberation, or do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Sandberg?
I'd like to make a motion that we delay, I don't even know if it needs an motion, but we delay this action for 2 months to continue negotiation in good faith with the HOA and the other property owner identified, with the understanding that at some point we do need a hard due date, and that we do need to move forward with providing utility services for the public benefit. So I'm seeing them here. They're asking for an additional time of negotiation. I think we can offer that. That's a show of our interest to continue that negotiation, but that at some point we do need to proceed with condemnation if the negotiations don't come to fruition.
All right, so there's been a motion to delay. Is that appropriate motion, City Attorney? Motion to delay, is that?
You would simply just not pass the recommended action. We could always bring it back at a future date.
But we need to vote on that.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And it's a motion to delay to a future date of 2 months? Can you specify a date, or is it?
I don't think the proper motion would be a motion to delay. It's in terms of whether you would support the recommended action, it would be a negative vote. So you wouldn't proceed with a condemnation at this point. We could then bring it back. Staff could bring it back at a future date.
Okay, so the motion is inappropriate.
I wouldn't go straight to inappropriate.
Or, I mean,
not necessary.
Not necessary. Okay, that works. Is there a second for the unnecessary motion?
I second the motion. I think it's appropriate motion.
Can we just call it something different? Like,
The motion is
Why don't-
seconded.
It's no motion. Let's direct staff to bring this back in 2 months.
motion,
The motion is.
delay to,
It's, don't take action tonight, and let's just, through a straw poll, if we have direction for staff to bring this back in 2 months.
Wow, that's what, we had just had a public hearing. I think we needed to
Oh, okay.
make a motion that's
all right.
appropriate, and we vote which way we vote on it, so,
Okay, so then the motion on the floor is to delay action on this
for 2 months. And it's been seconded by Councilmember Freed. Any further deliberation on the motion? Councilmember Agnew?
I'd like to make an amending motion. Since we missed our time frame for work this year, why don't we make an amending motion to postpone this for 6 months, bring it back in January. That will still give us enough time to do the construction in the time frame of next year.
There's been a motion, or second, or amending motion, I'm sorry, to delay for 6 months.
Mr. Mayor, if we could quickly confer, if we can't reach negotiations, if you start negotiations in 6 months, is that enough time to go through the eminent domain proceedings? That might be cutting it a little close. That's, yes, it would be enough time if we could not reach a settlement in January and council then brought this matter back and you had to go through the eminent domain proceeding, would you be able to get through the proceedings in order to meet your bid and construction schedule for next year?
I think you're going to be cutting it close because before we go to bid, we want to make sure we have the property in hand. Going out to bid takes a couple months by itself because first of all, you have to advertise, give the contractors time to respond, and you got to go through council. We can't guarantee it because it's a court process, so if it's contested, it could take a while. What we try to do is get possession and use at least, and even that, we can't guarantee a time period. We may be able to get.
Possession and use has additional risks to the city because you don't know what your costs are.
Correct.
At that point.
Correct.
So if the sense of council was they want to encourage and allow time for good faith negotiations to conclude, but be prepared to do eminent domain, is 2 months okay? 6 months too long? What's the most time council could give and still be prepared for the worst case scenario?
I believe 6 months, you'd probably be cutting it very close. I think 2 months would probably work. But again, we're all taking a risk on how long this process would take. So if you ask me, 2 months would be a lot better than 6 months, because we would probably give it another 3 to 4, and in the worst case, maybe 6 months. And then you're ready to go out to bid in about March. And that's where you need to be in order to build it in the dry season in about May, June. Anything else you risk.
So 6 months cuts it too close?
Yes.
2 months works? 3 months? Is that?
Again, it's all speculation on our part.
It sounds like 2 to 3 months is about where you ought to go.
All right, so we have an amending motion on the floor to go 6 months. Is there a second? Seeing none. Okay, so we're back down to the main motion, which is to delay this decision for 2 months. And second, is there any deliberation on the motion? Go ahead. Oh, you're ready to vote? I thought you wanted to. Okay. I'm going to vote no on this just because the city attorney told me that it's inappropriate. So place your votes. Fails. 3-3. So do we have another motion? What would be the appropriate motion before somebody throws out a motion, just to
The appropriate
vote
motion
on
here
it?
is to move to the previous question, to the recommended action. And
Okay.
if you didn't want to pass it tonight, you would then vote against it. If you vote against it, we could then continue our negotiations in good faith and bring this back at a future date for council to then pass the eminent domain action if we are unable to reach an agreement with the HOA.
Sounds good to me. Is there a motion? Councilmember McNeil makes the motion to move the recommended action. Is there a second? I'll second it. Is there any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Freed.
I don't agree, with all due respect, with the city attorney's direction on this matter. If we now, on the recommended action, are voting, we don't even need to take a vote on this recommended action, because if it fails, then who brings it back for vote? We can't vote on the exact same motion again in, what, a month, 2 months?
Why
We should just not vote on this evening. We should postpone this for 2 months and let negotiations continue.
Deputy Mayor.
Can we postpone to a date certain?
You can.
I make a motion to postpone to a certain date of 2 months from now. October 4th.
So that's an amending motion, I take it?
Yes.
To,
Second.
so October, to do what?
Postpone to a date certain.
Postpone to the date certain of October 4th. And it was seconded by
Me.
Councilmember Freed. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, place your vote. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. And we have the next agenda item is
Sir,
Councilmember Freed.
the underlying motion was changed. We still need to vote on the underlying motion.
Oh, that's right. So the underlying motion was to approve the staff recommendation?
No, it's actually now to postpone the vote for 2 months.
That was the amending motion.
It amended the original motion to say postpone the vote for 2 months.
Okay.
So we have to actually vote.
Okay.
That's correct. The motion on the floor now is to postpone for 2 months, postpone until October 4th.
All right, let's vote on it again. Please place your vote. Passes with the deputy mayor in the negative due to sleep problems and Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. Do we have the bandwidth to take on the next one? Okay, I think we got 10 minutes. This is a AB 16-133. Oh, no, that was the last one. AB-16-134, public hearing to consider adoption of ordinance regarding code amendments for impact fee deferrals. And we are officially opening the public hearing and having Gary Hassler provide a presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. I have a presentation for you, but given the late hour, if Council's willing, I will just go through it verbally rather than put the PowerPoint up. In 2015, the Washington State Legislature adopted engrossed Senate Bill 5923, requiring cities, counties, and towns to adopt a deferral system for development impact fees. The deadline for adoption of such a system is September 1st of this year. Impact fees include school, traffic, park, and fire prevention mitigation fees. Jurisdictions have essentially three options in adopting such a system. They can defer fees until final inspection of the property, until time of issuance of a certificate of occupancy or equivalent certification, or the closing of the first sale of the property. Staff is recommending that fees be deferred until final inspection. We believe that the other two options create administrative issues and tracking issues for staff. The law has a number of other provisions that I won't go through. It's in your agenda bill packet. I've provided an ordinance for you with revisions to several portions of the code that both institute such a deferral system and within the transportation, parks, and school fees sections refer to that deferral program. I would note that staff has one recommendation, one change to the staff recommendation, and that is within the ordinance, I believe it's subsection 5, which limits developers to deferring just 20 permits. We've had some staff discussion over the course of the evening and believe that that would be potentially problematic to track. So we're recommending that council simply remove that portion of the proposed language. With that, Mike Delac, building official and deputy director of community development, is with me. We'd be happy to answer any questions council has. Thank you.
Great. Could you point us to where in our packet that amendment you're proposing to make is
certainly
located? Oh, I found it.
It'll be on page 267 of your packet, and it's subsection H.
And so your staff recommendation would be to strike the entire H?
That's correct.
Okay.
The Act provides that cities can limit such deferrals to 20 permits, but we believe it would simply be difficult to track those and not worth doing.
Okay. Is there any public testimony? There's just one. Do you have any public testimony? Okay. Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember McNeil, second by Deputy Mayor to close the public hearing. Please place your vote. Passes unanimously. Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. Any discussion on the motion? Or I'm sorry. Is there any discussion or deliberation from council? Councilmember McNeil.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for all the information. I think it moves us one step closer to development, paying for development at time of impact. So it's a win for the development world where they can defer those fees a little bit, helps them out for their carrying costs. At the same time, the city gets to generate the revenue from the impacts that are actually happening from the development. So thank you for the hard work on that.
Any further discussion, questions from council? No. Motion would be in order.
Move the recommended action with the amendment to strike section H, I think it was, regarding the 20-unit limit.
Moved by Councilmember Sandberg, seconded by Councilmember McNeil. I think you got it that time. To pass the staff recommendation, which is, sorry, I got to get back up to the. There it is. Approval of the proposed ordinance adopting a deferral system for the collection of development impact fees for new single-family residential construction as required by Washington State, with the amendment to the packet to remove section 21.06H out of the proposed code. Is that correct? All right, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, place your vote. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. There is no executive session, I believe, tonight. We did the city manager report. Motion to adjourn will be in order.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Agnew, second by Councilmember Sandberg. Please place your vote. Oh, but it passes unanimously with Councilmember Spivey absent and excused. We are adjourned.